mention about Spacestation in the morning. So we have Bradley Mora, the CEO of Spacestation, as our next speaker. It's the largest manufacturing operation of cannabis beverages in the United States. We were planning to have Megan Miller as well from the Mammoth Distribution, but because of COVID, she was not able to make it. So can I please invite Brad on the stage, and he will be sharing his experience and thoughts on how to scale your beverage brand.
So I'm Brad Mora. I'm CEO of Spacestation, which as of Q4 2021 is now a subsidiary of Mammoth Distribution, who's the parent company for Heavy Hitters Vape Carts, Mora Flower, Surplus Vape Carts, if you're familiar with those companies. And so we previously were just a co-manufacturing operation. And then now for additional context, we're a vertically integrated beverage house for Mammoth, and then still run the co-manufacturing operation as an autonomous unit. And so I'm gonna walk through today on how to scale your beverage brand. And so the different facets of what to consider when bringing a brand to market, and then doing things right the first time around will empower you to be able to scale that brand as you continue to find success in product market fit. So we'll walk through quick take and the theses that we have on the cannabis beverage market, why we chose to build a co-manufacturing operation in the first place and look to support growing the industry as a whole and continue to invest in growing beverage brands. Then we'll walk through how to scale a beverage brand, what are the key considerations, the key workflows, and how to ensure that you're focusing on the right things early to find success, find the right partners, build the right supply chain so that not only you can scale in California, but then also nationwide into Canada, that type of thing. And finally, we'll do a quick pitch on Spacestation, and then I'll open it up for questions. So understanding the cannabis beverage market, beyond cannabis being a headwind that people are bullish on, and I think there's going to be more and more consumers that enter the space as availability, regulations, the headwinds that exist today fall to the wayside, and people are able to access the product. But when you look at beverage specifically, I believe it's supported by more and even greater macro headwinds than even the broader cannabis industry. And so if we look at where beverage is at today, there are two macro mega trends that are currently underway that I think will support the growth of cannabis beverages specifically. So first one being healthy imbibe. People are changing their consumption habits, even as it relates to consuming vices like alcohol. There's seltzer, kombucha, alternatives to alcohol exist today, and then also an extremely prevalent non-alcoholic trend that's taking place. And then you pair that with functional beverages, which if you walk down a Whole Foods aisle and then now even a Walmart aisle, you'll find that a lot more beverages tailored towards getting a specific feeling or function are permeating. And as a function of that, we believe cannabis beverages will actually meet at the intersection of these two megatrends. And so as the public's able to access them in a more meaningful way, there's this massive opportunity to meet people where they already are going to be in terms of their beverage consumption habits, and even as that sits outside of cannabis as a whole. So when we look at where beverage is at today, this is specifically the California market, and what I would say is penetration of cannabis beverages is linear up and to the right, and not necessarily parabolic, as I think some people may have expected it to be at this point. And I think the things contributing to that are, there are headwinds at each part of the supply chain, and then just general distribution and access issues that the consumers that have products don't necessarily go to the places that those products are sold. That is preventing beverage from being the massive category that it definitely will be in the coming years. And so when thinking about how to scale a beverage brand, we want to take a step back and look at what is the entire beverage ecosystem that's currently at play. And so when you're creating a brand, it's not unlike building any other beverage brand in terms of finding the right raw material vendors, finding the right formulators, and then the one spin on cannabis beverages, finding the right cannabis input partner to ensure that you're in a position to scale once you found product market fit. And then once you've developed the product and gone through that process, finding the right partners at the contract manufacturing level, at the distributor level, and then examining what your go-to-market is going to be to get beverages into the hands of the people that want to drink them is critical points of consideration early on as you think about how am I going to scale this. And so the 4 buckets, one is the formula, the packaging, and the supply chain that you're setting up. Is it something that you can actually scale, specifically in California, like from a California lens, but then also nationwide? There's an immense amount of nuance to how you have to scale a cannabis beverage that has THC in it today in the regulatory framework that currently exists. Thinking about manufacturing partners, distribution partners, and then ultimately the sales channels that you go through. These are all critical points early on that you're gonna have to make decisions on to figure out how you're gonna scale. And so, quick overview on how we've approached formulation, things we've learned as we've brought a series of beverages to the market or helped the brands that we work with bring brands to market. And the first one is formulation. And when you're formulating, there's a couple different routes to go. First one is a flavor house, which is generally going to be a cheaper but less customizable option. It's gonna lock you into a partner who sells you your flavors. And ultimately, it's a cost efficient, but yeah, as I said, less customizable way to get what you want. I think for brands that are early in their life cycle, they generally are a good partner to get off the ground with. And as you continue to refine the flavor profile on the drink, you can decide later on whether or not you want to bring on an independent formulator to help you customize what that drink's profile is. Similar with packaging, there's routes you can go that are a little more expensive on the per unit side of things, i.e. working with a distributor versus trying to go straight to vendors. But what you're gonna find early on is that MOQs, minimum order quantities of what you're looking to buy, are gonna be much lower with a distributor. And ultimately, if you have limited access to capital, when you're starting a brand, the total aggregate outlay of cash is gonna be, I think, your key metric to focus on and conserving that cash. And so working with distributors to find packaging, or the partners that we'll talk about later in this presentation, are the most efficient way to get to market quickly, and then also have a one-stop shop to get everything you need taken care of. Some key lessons that we learned in the formulation process and ultimately building a supply chain around different beverage SKUs is that, one, the simpler the formula, the better. Ultimately, in today's, say, tumultuous supply chain situation, we've seen situations where someone has a juice product, and in that juice, like the juice that they're using isn't available next month. And so now you've got a product built on a supply chain that you can't continue to replicate over time. That's gonna be a huge problem. And so understanding the ingredients that are going in, the fewer you have, it's going to be easier to manage costs and manage that supply chain. And then also considering taking a brand from state to state in cannabis beverage means you're gonna have a lot more points of manufacturing and distribution. And so actually allocating those resources across the US is going to be more difficult than a beverage brand who doesn't have THC and can use one major manufacturer and distributor to serve a region versus having going state to state. And so all the considerations a small beverage brand would have outside of cannabis, you need to be more thoughtful about inside of cannabis to really weather the storm of the early days of getting off the ground so you can find product market fit. The last thing I'd say on this is supply chain shortages, they're very real. And so getting ahead of any packaging that you need early on, this goes back to why it's great to use a distributor. You need to think with 12, 16, 24 week lead times in mind when you're trying to build out a product. And last thing you want to do is do a production run, scale. People love the product, it's moving off shelves, and then you can't get another production run out. And now you're in a situation where you're hurting relationships with retailers and also your consumer because the product's not readily available. And then finally, in an inflationary environment that we're in right now, everywhere across the board, you should be looking to cut costs, and ultimately lighter packaging, especially in a very nascent distribution supply chain that exists in cannabis beverage. Going with lighter form factors versus heavier form factors is gonna save you on cost, not only on the shipping of the raw materials for your product, but then also on the outbound, your finished goods getting to a dispensary. So scaling manufacturing. Ultimately, the partner you pick for this is gonna be a key bottleneck into how big and how quickly your product can expand and market. In California, there's I'd say, the most options out of any state. That being said, the number of co-manufacturers, the numbers, it's still limited compared to the broader beverage market, but finding that right partner based on the type of product you're doing, so whether that's canning or bottling, the capacity that they have, can they take you on and then also get you line time in the amount of time that you're looking to get to market in, and then also continue to replicate that over time. Are you going to get that line time that you need? And then finally, ancillary services. And so as a co-packer, I would say in the larger beverage outside of cannabis, there are people who will manage all of your raw materials for you. You're not likely going to find that in cannabis beverage, just given that the manufacturers are nascent, supply chain's nascent, but figuring out, are there other ways that this manufacturer can help you, and then also evaluating them on that. When looking at a manufacturer, and these are just anecdotes and things we've seen as people have come online at Spacestation, and then also looked at our competitors, is do your due diligence when you're working with a manufacturer. At this point, you know what your needs are going to be, and so making sure that you've got the right list of questions in place before you go meet with somebody is critical. Go see the physical location to make sure that it is what people say it is. And then when you're reviewing contracts, the unfortunate truth is in cannabis, there are so many tick-tack expenses that the manufacturer is experiencing, especially on the taxation side, that understanding the full flow of costs so that you understand your true cost of goods sold is critical before you start placing purchase orders. And I would say it's been helpful for us, and I know it's been helpful for people that have worked with other manufacturers, that if you can have somebody on the ground during early production runs to be there to, one, sample the product, two, quality control as things are happening, it's a great way to reduce risk, especially on those early production runs before your pre-scale. So scaling distribution, in my opinion, this is the most difficult thing to take on if you're a beverage brand in California today. And that's a function of distribution in California cannabis has been set up for smaller form factors. It's vape carts, flower, things that the value of something you can put in your arms in terms of vape carts is the equivalent of an entire pallet of beverage that weighs a metric ton. And so the Sprinter vans that currently move all that product around are not well equipped to get beverages to market. And because of that, there are fewer channels for you to get your beverages to dispensaries, and the price is higher on a relative basis than what you might find outside of beverage. And so the reality is when you are searching for a distribution partner, you're going to be selling yourself, because there's enormous amount of beverages that have been coming to market. There's only a few distributors that are equipped to move beverages. And ultimately, they've got a whole slew of priorities with products that are on a higher dollar per value basis in their trucks. And so when you go to them, you have to make a compelling narrative as to why you're a good beverage to work with. And the final point would be moving product is different than selling product. And so some distribution partners are going to have sales teams. That being said, you're still going to need an in-house sales team, and you should account for that in terms of how you're thinking about growing your organization, because the prioritization of where beverages fit into what's being sold by that in-house sales team, we've tend to seen that be lower on the totem pole of what's important to the salespeople and the overall organization. And so it's critical that you have your own true passionate advocates for the product out in market selling it. Some key lessons learned, things we've seen that our customers have had to navigate, is just understanding how your contracts work to a T, and really what does that mean for pricing? What does that mean for turnaround times? And sticking to that contract is critical, just given how important it is to your business that product shows up on time. A good example of that is doing due diligence for how someone performs on 420. That's the most inundated time of the year for a distributor. And we've seen in the past that someone might be doing well in March, but then April rolls around and all of a sudden products are delayed. And so for an early beverage brand that is now trying to hit scale and they're relying on these big opportunities to get product into market, you want to make sure your distributor can come through on that end. And then finally, there is a broader capital constriction that is taking place in cannabis broadly right now. And so I think doing your diligence on the solvency of the distributor that you work with is critical. If a distributor goes under and they're holding your product, the way that regulations work right now makes it very difficult for you to get that product from their defunct warehouse to another distributor, and then also the switching costs, the times to go find new distributors, keep the product flow moving. And so a distributor going under can obviously be a huge hindrance to scaling, especially if you've got momentum. And then finally, scaling sales channels and geographic footprint. I'll talk about this from a California perspective and then also from a nationwide and international perspective. In California, there are 700 plus dispensary chains. What we've generally seen is there is a Pareto 80-20 rule in terms of there's a smaller segment of dispensaries that are definitely moving a large portion of the beverages out there. And so as you think about getting your beverages into dispensaries, the larger chains generally are where the volume moves. That being said, you need to be ready for a more complex, arduous sales cycle, more competitive sales cycle. But in the end, penetrating the dispensary chains that are larger and have more locations in California, and generally, I would say a more sophisticated footprint in terms of where are the refrigerators placed. Is the back room large enough to actually store beverages at scale? The larger, more sophisticated partners are going to be easier to work with and scale with. When you're thinking about other channels, DTC is the other option you've got in California. And so that can come in the form of working with delivery partners, scale delivery partners like Ease, or essentially build your own e-commerce store via a service like Ginger. What we've generally seen is that DTC is a marketing channel for brands. Because of the added costs of working with a delivery partner, the margins that you can take on beverages, which tend to already be small, are closer to zero when you're on a delivery platform. And so that being said, we've also seen that it's access to newer consumers, ones who won't necessarily go to dispensaries due to the behavior change that's associated with that it's a way for people to access, especially on the lower dose side of things, new consumers. And then when thinking about going multi-state or into Canada, in a perfect world, partnering with an MSO would allow you to do that at scale. So you hit multiple states at a time. The reality of what we've seen is that MSOs tend to move slower than a beverage brand would like to see. And then also it does tie you up from moving quicker once you're in that type of relationship. And so ultimately it's a case-by-case basis, but like as things have unfolded today, that hasn't been a truly successful route, I think, for beverage brands coming out of California. And so when you're thinking about expanding into other states, you're going to need to get on the ground and find independent manufacturing partners in each of those states. And what I would say is we hear of more and more coming online, especially in more coveted target states. And then, for example, in New York, I think on day one, there'll be multiple highly sophisticated beverage partners that you could be working with to get your beverage to market. And so unlike beverage outside of cannabis, scaling nationally is like building a number of mini businesses. You're going to have multiple sales teams. You can't rely on one distributor to take you throughout a region. You have to be very regimented with the playbook that you deploy to relaunch your business essentially in each of these new markets. And then coming back and circling to earlier, having a supply chain that now supports each of these new markets in essentially, an independent business. And so it's being done and it is doable. And candidly, outside of California, there are markets, especially on the low dose side of things, that have proven to be a lot friendlier in terms of the customer's willingness to pay a higher dollar per milligram for products. And I think that's due to different behaviors with regards to being a legacy consumer versus a new consumer. And so there's definitely opportunities that lie outside of California for lower dose brands to go out, expand, and have success, especially based on what we've seen over the last couple of years. So to wrap up the presentation, quick pitch on Spacestation. We're the largest cannabis beverage manufacturer in the United States. We are currently open for business on co-packing despite the acquisition we did with Mammoth Distribution. And so if there are any up and coming brands in here that are looking to get to market, we would love to be your partner. Thank you.